Does the latest update Thursday from John Mozeliak regarding Nolan Arenado change the outlook for the Cardinals' third baseman and his potential trade market? What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Thursday, February 13th, 2025, live from West Palm Beach, Florida, as we had a pretty eventful day down here in Palm Beach County in Jupiter at the Cardinals facilities. Plenty going on throughout Cardinals camp now that pitchers and catchers have officially reported. The position players will follow closely behind in the coming days, and then it'll be a full camp and a full go with lots of fun things like live batting practice and eventually Grapefruit League games to talk about on the YouTube channel here. But for now, check out the Sights and Sounds series. First of all, plenty of videos from Cardinals camp in Jupiter that I've been posting to the channel. Tonight on the podcast, though, we're going to talk about a couple of specific topics. Number one, the latest on Nolan Arenado. We talked last night after the Bregman signing, basically saying Yankees, Dodgers, feels like those are the two likely outcomes if a deal is going to come together. And honestly, last night, after the news of Bregman had just come down, I thought, cool, this means the Cardinals are going to have an opportunity to figure out where they need to go from here, and this at least clarifies the market for them, like the Red Sox are not going to be the answer. A day has passed. John Mozeliak has had more public comments on this topic, and it may be time to resign yourself to the idea of Nolan Arenado reporting to Cardinals camp and being on this team in 2025. We'll talk about what John Mozeliak had to say, the degree to which a trade still could maybe come together, and more specifically, like if it's going to happen, whether it's likely anymore or not. I'll still give you my latest thoughts on maybe where it could be and the circumstances that would need to happen in order for a trade to still come together, to the variety of places that conceivably could still be landing spots for Arenado. Some interesting comments from Mozeliak this afternoon. Also got a chance today with some other reporters down here in Jupiter to hear from Lars Nootbaar and Brendan Donovan, who both just wrapped up their arbitration hearings within recent weeks, and the results have now come down. One of them was a winner, one of them not successful, and the third Cardinal who was in arbitration and had a hearing was Andre Pallante. He was successful, winning his case against the team for like an extra $175,000. It wasn't, for a lot of Cardinals fans, an amount worth going to arbitration over. Folks just said, pay the man his money. Ultimately, the Cardinals are going to have to do that because Pallante beat them in the hearing. His representation made the more compelling argument in front of the arbiters. However, we didn't get to hear from Pallante yet, hoping to get a chance to talk to him Friday. But Donovan and Nootbaar, we heard from. Nootbaar was successful in his arbitration hearing. Donovan, unsuccessful in his bid against the team. And so, obviously, inherently, those guys had some different perspectives. Both had plenty of humility and grace about the process, but given that one of them was successful, one of them not as much, their perspectives were obviously different. So I want to talk about it, and we'll actually hear some audio from both of those guys a little bit later on in the show. But let's start with the big topic, the one that's going to remain the topic until we either see Arenado report to camp or he gets traded. It is Nolan Arenado and his place on the 2025 St. Louis Cardinals. The latest, of course, happened last night. Alex Bregman signs with the Boston Red Sox. $40 million AAV, 3 years, $120 million, a bunch of opt-outs. I think an opt-out after every month or so of each season is kind of the way that it seemed. That means, okay, the Red Sox are out on Arenado, obviously. Arenado was kind of thought to be the backup plan, plan B for Boston, but Boston got their plan A. So now where do the Cardinals go from here? Well, there was a MLB media event where some of the, really it was like the managers and the GMs, the executives from the teams that work out down here in the general vicinity of Roger Dean Stadium, because that's where they held the event. In past years, this has been something that every spring, there's usually one in Florida, one in Arizona for the spring teams in both locations. Rob Manfred usually at both. This time he's out in Arizona, and they kind of split it up amongst the Florida teams so that nobody has to cross the state and the swamplands of, Orlando or whatever, surrounding Orlando, and go to meeting all in one spot, because the commissioner of baseball is not going to be here anyway. I guess they just kind of made it some smaller events. So it was like the Cardinals, the Marlins, the Nationals, the Astros, and I think the Mets probably coming down from Port St. Lucie with the 5 teams represented at Roger Dean Stadium earlier this afternoon. I was not at this event. I had my radio show in the afternoon for KTGR. I needed to get back to the Airbnb and prepare for that. So I was unable to be there this afternoon when John Mozeliak was asked by reporters, hey, so how about that Bregman thing? How does that impact you guys? Right? Because that was obviously going to be a big topic of conversation. So I didn't get to have that or be part of that availability with Mo. But everybody that you saw, from John Denton to Katie Woo to everybody else that would have been there, I'm sure they all tweeted it. I saw those too. John Mozeliak, quote, Arenado is likely going to be part of our club at this point, end quote. That's the gist from the conversation that Mo had with the media there at Roger Dean Stadium earlier this afternoon on Thursday. So he's going to be here, is sort of the way that the Cardinals are at least preparing. I can say candidly, all of the trade conversations I've been in, a bounce back is what scares me the most. Great players have that extra gear. There's another quote from John Mozeliak regarding Arenado. The Cardinals are prepping to begin the season with Arenado on the roster. That's a headline from John Denton. Another quote. Right now, the mindset has to be that Nolan Arenado is our third baseman until that changes. So, the door is still left open, but there's some challenges because there was that group of 5 teams, right? Mo said it yesterday. There were 5. He was asked point blank, and he answered point blank. 5 teams, right? We kind of knew 4 of them. Boston, Yankees, Dodgers, Padres, mystery team. Probably not the Astros because, again, if that was on the list, Mo probably would have said 4 because obviously there was a chance to trade him to the Astros, and Arenado ended up saying no. Was it the Angels? Is the other team? Who knows? I have not seen necessarily a list of confirmation. I know John Denton had a list earlier in the offseason. It might be those exact 5 teams. I don't have it in front of me. It's not important to necessarily where we're at this point in the process for me to go look that up, so I'm not going to. Point being, limited number of teams that John Mozeliak could work with if the Arenado thing is going to come to fruition. And another aspect of it that was discussed today, reading this from JD's Twitter feed, he said if Arenado wants to trade, he must expand the list of teams he would be traded to beyond 5. That list drops to 4 with the Red Sox now out. Quote from Mozeliak, I think it would have to open up a little bit more. Yes, we've exhausted the others. So last night, I still kind of thought, and if you listened to yesterday's podcast, you probably came away thinking, yeah, Brendan thinks Arenado is going to get traded because I said it. I said, I think he's probably still going to be on the move. They'll figure something out with the Yankees. I still think the Dodgers are a wild card in this because they can circle back at the very end. They can find the Cardinals in their most desperate strait and say, sure, we'll take him. You're not going to get a lot for him, but we know he wants to be here. We'll take him. Also, you need to pay down that contract. They'd have the Cardinals over a barrel, and the Cardinals would probably say, okay, sure. And then the deal would get done. That's what I kind of thought would happen last night. Didn't know what the timeline would be for that, but that was my perspective. But yeah, Mo, if your question is, hey, does Mo saying what he said this afternoon change your opinion at all, Brendan? My answer would be, yeah, I think he is prepping as though Arenado's not going to be dealt. They're not going to be able to find the deal that's going to be suitable to all parties. But that last part is important. If he wants a deal, he might have to open it up a little bit more. Yeah, because they've exhausted the others. Now, to this point in the offseason, I've seen it and talked with people on YouTube in the comments section, well, why don't the Cardinals ask him to expand his list? And if your argument would be that the Cardinals should have had more constant communication with Arenado throughout this process in the offseason, or Arenado's agent, because of the Mozeliak comment from earlier this week that, well, they haven't really linked up in the last week or two because they're dealing with arbitration stuff. Whether that's reasonable or whether that's hey, if Arenado's priority 1, 2, and 3, why wouldn't you be linking up with his representation more frequently? Fair criticism, I think, because if it's that important of a thing, you don't go a week or 2 weeks without linking up. I think that's probably a fair criticism of Mo. But otherwise, it's a lot of this has been Mo trying to cater to what Arenado purportedly wants. Something worth mentioning, and I think Samir put it into a comment on a recent video, said, hey, can you clarify, has Arenado demanded a trade? Because it's really been presented publicly that the Cardinals, remember Mozeliak came out at the end of season presser and said, hey, we're going to have to lower the payroll. Payroll will go down. And then the questions came, okay, how would you go about doing that? Will you trade big contracts? Yeah, we need to talk to the guys that have big contracts and no trade clauses and figure out, who's staying, who's going. Sonny wanted to stay. Wilson wanted to stay. Arenado said, you could trade me. That'd be okay. Yes, that is the way that it has been framed. And through that lens, that definitely does kind of fall short of a trade demand. And then if you couple it with the fact that he rejected Houston, he blocked that deal, you could paint a picture. And look, if Arenado shows up to camp in the next handful of days and we get a first chance to talk with him, maybe he'll decline to talk about it at all. I don't know. I imagine he's going to have something to say when that point should come, if he arrives here in Jupiter, as now is the expectation. Last night I said, well, he could hold out. That would really be a leverage play. But also, I mean, if this is like an antagonistic type of deal, the Cardinals would say, okay, you're getting fined. And then it really gets ugly. I don't think it's fair to necessarily predict something like that because, well, we haven't actually heard publicly Arenado say anything bad about the team. He hasn't even said, I demand to be traded. It's all happening kind of behind the scenes, and that's the way it should work, right? If you have an agent, even if that is the thing that Arenado wants, the agent's job is to kind of facilitate all of that. And so that's kind of the way that it's been. We've heard from the agent at winter meetings. We have not, Joel Wolf was out there talking about it. We have not heard from Arenado. Here's why that makes sense from Arenado's side. If he shows up at camp in a couple of days and we talk to him, he can realistically say, hey, man, I'm really happy to be here with my teammates. I'm excited about this season. Yes, there was an opportunity to potentially, pursue some other avenues because of where the Cardinals were from a business perspective. I understood that. There was no hard feelings about that. And I told them, some places I would be willing to play if they felt a trade was what was in the best interest of the organization. That being said, I was presented a trade. It was widely reported that just wasn't something that I felt compelled to do because I'm really still happy to be here with the Cardinals. It was really a select few opportunities that I think would have made sense for me and my family, and it didn't end up working out with those teams, so I'm glad to be back here in Jupiter with the Cardinals. He could say all that, and it could be 100% true. Like, from a PR perspective, there's no quotes. You don't have any quotes from Arenado from this offseason that are attributed on the record where he said, I want out of St. Louis. So, although I feel like a lot of the fan base has sort of soured on the guy because of the way this process has played out, and it's fair to say, he's put the Cardinals in a bad spot by rejecting the Houston trade. But this boils down to a kind of a yin and yang that I have been discussing the entire offseason. And now we might finally find out the extent to which Arenado wants to be here versus be somewhere else versus, what's the motivation for the guy? Because the Houston thing is either something he regrets not taking because he definitely wants to be out of St. Louis, or it's one of those deals where, he didn't take it because it wasn't the right thing, and he's content if he has to come back to the Cardinals. Because he holds the cards. He holds the leverage to say, I have no trade clause. If you want to trade me, you have to trade me to a place that I want to go, or I'll be there. Right? It can still, from a PR standpoint, Arenado can come out smelling like a rose if he shows up to camp on time, maybe even a little early, kind of losing, time on the calendar for that. If that should happen, then it really could. You could paint a picture, and he could paint this picture when he shows up and say, look, I never said anything that y'all said I said. This isn't, I didn't say that. Right? But a lot of it's been through the agent. And so we're aware that he had a desire or an interest or even a willingness to be sent elsewhere. But he blocked the one opportunity there was. So that's where I say, we're going to kind of find out the extent to which he really wanted to be gone. And if he really does want to be gone and regrets the Houston thing, if he had it to do over again, he would accept instead of say, yeah, not right now. Wait for something better to come along, and then to this point, nothing has. If that's the way that he feels, and he really doesn't want to have to deal with the awkwardness of coming to camp because he really did want to be out, and he kind of overplayed his hand, if that's the way he feels, you might see Nolan Arenado expand his list. There are teams like maybe the Tigers, maybe the Blue Jays that would be interested, but Arenado has not cleared those teams to acquire him. Right? And those are just examples of teams that might make sense or that have been kind of rumored or bandied about in the public sphere. If the Houston thing is a regret and Arenado wishes he had that to do over again, it would make sense that he would say, all right, I'll go to some of these other spots. If as Lars Nootbaar told us this morning, like, Arenado's got a lot of friends in this room. It's not like any of us are rooting for him to be gone. And if he comes back, great, he's back and he's on the team and he's probably going to help him win some baseball games. If there's a comfort factor there for Arenado to remain with this team, then, he probably doesn't expand his list in the way that it can be framed as, I never really wanted to leave. Cardinals came to me, asked kind of where my head was, and told me the situation. It ended up being a different description from what I was told when I re-upped and didn't opt out a couple of years ago. At the time, the team was ready to add. They've added free agents the last couple of years. First Contreras. The next year, it was the pitchers, Lynn and Gibson and Sonny Gray. So, they did that for a couple of years to try to put winners on the field consistently. They're telling me now we're going in a different direction. So I was open-minded to being moved because it's different than what they said it would be. But I'm, as Nolan Arenado, I also am not desperate to be out of here, as evidenced by my rejection of a trade that would have sent me out of here. So, like I said, last night I was thinking it through and thinking, yeah, man, the Yankees, they're going to want to get in on this now that Bregman went to the Red Sox. But the Yankees, the way it's being reported, they got to get rid of the Marcus Stroman money in order to even think about the Arenado thing, is the way everybody seems to be framing it. And the Cardinals have zero use for Marcus Stroman. So unless you're involving a third team, which would then probably mean the Cardinals even have less leverage or having to eat more of the Arenado money just to get it done, at a certain point, you're like, what are we doing? And like the quote I said, I read off from John Denton's Twitter account from his recent story, where Mozeliak said, candidly, of all the trade conversations I've been in, and then it's in parentheses, but they were referencing an Arenado bounce-back year is what scares me the most. Great players have that extra gear. It would be kind of wild at this point for the Cardinals to get desperate enough to where instead of paying maybe $20 million of the 60-some-odd million left, like it was going to be with the Houston deal, and maybe even it was less than that, $15 million, whatever the number is, they're like, we'll pay half. We'll pay more than half to have him go. Okay, what's the incentive? Well, we're saving the other half. We don't have to pay him. Okay, sure, but what are you getting in return? Well, I don't know. The prospects don't really matter. We're just trying to get rid of the money. If it's a salary dump, but you're also paying a ton of the salary, and it's a player that, I mean, it's not like he's over the hill, very conceivably could have a bounce-back year, maybe you step back from the ledge and go, let's just not make this trade. Does it conflict? Does Arenado being here conflict with the goal of let's get opportunity for all these young guys? Gorman, Walker, make sure Nootbaar's got an everyday run if he's healthy enough to do so. Burleson, I'll put Herrera in that bucket too. Like, does it conflict with those goals? It does. For sure it does on paper. But I take you back to last spring when they signed Brandon Crawford, and then Alec Burleson seemingly had no spot even on the bench, and he ended up being an everyday player for the most part. Like, there's a world in which a couple injuries happen, a couple things change. Next thing you know, even with Arenado here, there might be playing time to go around for everyone. But good luck making that opening day lineup when you're writing it out. Sports Hub STL starting up in a few days. You've seen hopefully all over social media and Twitter and YouTube and the like. And I'll be contributing Cardinals content to Sports Hub STL coming up soon. But I got word from Joe Roderick, who's a director of content, I believe is Joe's title. He wants me to mock up my opening day lineup for the Cardinals as something that we would release and talk about when the website drops. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, Arenado yes or Arenado no. That's the first decision. But then good luck trying to fill out a 1 through 9 after that. I have a general idea of what I would go with. My guy Damien sent me one today, and I said, yeah, I think I have the exact same 9 guys. Put them in the right order could be challenging. But yeah, like, it's tricky because you think of a guy like Burleson as an everyday player. Where's he playing? So on paper, it could be a little bit of a challenge. Could it end up working itself out? Yes, with injuries. You're hoping guys don't get hurt, but like, realistically, there's attrition as the season goes along, so that's definitely a possibility. But also, like, are the Cardinals a better team with Arenado, or are they a worse team with him? I think they're a better team, as long as he's not pouting about the circumstances, which I don't think he's going to be. He's going to be trying to do the best for himself, his family, his team, everybody, whatever order that might be in. Those are all going to be motivators. And for his legacy, there's a guy that's still on that potential Hall of Fame track. I don't think that's just impossible. for Nolan Arenado. He's going to be ready to play. He's going to be ready to try to have a bounce-back campaign wherever he is. So I think it's fair to step back from the ledge and go, hey, Arenado being here, if you're a Cardinal fan, are you happy about that? Because, shoot, the whole offseason, it was like we were ready for the drama of it to be over, I think. I got tired of talking about it without having any real substantial updates. But if the guy's going to be back and you're a Cardinal fan, you're like, I get to watch him play third base for another year. I get to watch him, pull the ball over the wall for another year and probably have better offensive numbers than he did last year and bring that fire and that intensity that he has back to the St. Louis Cardinals. If you're a fan, like, I know it's kind of exhausting, the entire course of this process, but are you feeling like having him back would be maybe not the worst thing in the world? Let me know what you think, Cardinals fans, because I know this has been a roller coaster of emotions for a situation that has had nothing happen. There's just been nothing. And yet it seems like now it's leaning toward, all right, he might actually be still here, and maybe we'll take some more twists and turns before the end of the saga. But how are you feeling about the idea that Arenado might actually stay? Happy? Confused? Don't know how to feel? Irritated because you had bought into what the front office was saying about, hey, let's see the young guys, and now you're worried they're not going to be able to effectively manage that goal of theirs? Like, let me know in the comments section how you're feeling, because I don't think there's any wrong answer. There could be a range of emotions about this, but it's going to be very, very interesting if and when he shows up to see kind of how that plays out. As far as a trade possibility, I've laid it out. If it's Yankees, it's because something happened with Stroman, but I don't think that's a solution for the Cardinals. They've already got 5 incumbent starters, and they're still looking to find a spot for McGreevy. Again, I think an injury probably is how that ends up happening. Every spring since I started covering the Cardinals, there has been at least one spring training injury to a starting pitcher from the projected rotation to allow the next guy up to get an opportunity, at least at the beginning of the year. Last year it was Gray. Year before it was like Wainwright. You had a Michaelis year. You had a Carlos Martinez year. You could go all the way back. It's happened every single time. So we'll see whether that ends up being the case this year. But you're not trying to add Stroman. Like, you're not trying to muddy those waters any further. So the Yankees thing would seemingly be a long shot as a result of that, unless you involve a third team. I think the Dodgers could always swoop in at the end and just kind of make it easy. But I also think the Cardinals aren't getting a very good deal from the Dodgers if it's them. Like, I don't think you're talking about somebody significant from one of their young pitching prospects or whatever coming over. I just think it ends up being a favor to Arenado and a favor to, the Dodgers would just get to have another really good player without really giving anything for him. It's been the deferred money, and this would be like, just cut the money in half. So I don't really think that benefits the Cardinals to just drop him in the laps of the Dodgers. The other way is maybe he expands the list. If he really does want to be somewhere else, something like the Tigers, something like the Blue Jays, one of those ideas. Buster Olney put this out here earlier on Thursday night. The Cubs were in on Alex Bregman. Conversations between front office and ownership of like, do we have the money? Can we get the funds to do this? And the Ricketts, they're not really spending, you kind of know how that goes. But that was a $40 million AAV contract. Arenado, if the Cardinals paid it down, it would be much less. Only 3 years of commitment. Would the Cardinals trade him within the division to the Cubs? I say there's zero chance of that happening. Like, zero. It's not going to happen. But I said on our radio show this afternoon on KTGR, kind of hope it does, because that would be good for business. People would be livid. Wilson Contreras on the Cardinals, Arenado on the Cubs. Imagine. It's not going to happen, but if it did, it would be crazy. We would be having some YouTube shows. That's for sure. So that's kind of my general thoughts on the Arenado stuff. Let me know yours in the comments section below. Definitely interesting. But I want to get into, while I still have some time, it's late at night, but I'm going to finish this up and get into the arbitration stuff, because we got a chance to hear from Newt Barr, who, basically said, wasn't so bad. Arbitration, not so bad. Maybe a benefit for players. His agent had told him, he said a year and a half ago, that every player should go through it once just to be able to understand that side of the business and that aspect of what it looks like from the other side. And, you get an idea for what they value in those rooms, and that can be useful down the road, whatever the case might be. All of these things, I think Newt, made perfect sense. He said, look, it's not like they talked about anything I didn't see coming. Durability. Hey, can this guy stay on the field? Probably some of the stuff the Cardinals used against him. He said, I was just in a suit sitting there looking dumb. Just, I didn't really have anything to do for it. I just needed to be there. My representation took care of it all, but they got the win for him. Makes an extra $500,000 on his salary for this season. So it was not surprising that he had a generally positive experience. It's not to say that had he lost, that would have completely changed or wouldn't have changed. I don't know. We can't speak to that because it didn't go that way. But in victory, he was like, honestly, not so bad. I've heard some horror stories. Yeah, they say some stuff about you, but you got to have thick skin. That was the gist of how Nude felt about it. Donovan was not necessarily different in the way that he approached it. Both had good humility. Both were, understanding that it's a business and it's part of the process. But there were more interesting things said by Donovan, even as he wanted to make sure he was respecting the process and just understanding that it's just part of the deal and he wasn't ripping anybody. But he was honest. He was truthful in the information he did divulge about kind of the way that it led to a hearing in the first place. He had some interesting comments about the nature of multi-year extension. Was it explored? The nature of, when he kind of knew in the process that a hearing was going to be his ultimate destination here rather than being able to get something done on a one-year deal. And he also talked a little bit about what was used against him in the hearing room in terms of the team's arguments. He didn't divulge much about that. He wanted to respect that part of the process. But there was one comment that I thought was very notable, and we can kind of speculate and wonder as to exactly what that may have entailed. But I want to play a little bit of that Brendan Donovan audio for you before we get out of here tonight on B-Schaeff Daily. So let's start with this from Brendan Donovan. You'll hear this audio. Was asked the opening question about the ARB stuff, and it was clear that he had sort of a train of thought that he wanted to make sure he got out and said this at the very beginning of it. So we'll just listen to some of what Brendan Donovan had to say here. A little bit of a longer answer, but giving some good insight into how he viewed the process.
I think the first thing I should mention is I'm not a disgruntled employee by any means. I knew walking in that room it is a coin flip. It really is. With a lot of times hearings favoring team. So I knew that going in. And I'm very humble in victory and very humble in defeat. And I knew that was a real possibility walking in. So I'd first like that to kind of just be the first thing out there. Definitely learned a lot in this process. Obviously, things shook out a little different than how I expected it, with some minimal effort to really get anything done.
Now, I'm going to pause it there for a moment. That's part one that I want to kind of get into. Make sure we have that in the back of our mind. He mentions here at the beginning, minimal effort to really get anything done. He's going to go into talking about multi-year extension, but later on, again, we'll be asked about kind of a follow-up on that response about minimal effort and what that exactly pertained to. But just keep that in mind as you're listening to the rest of this, and we'll kind of double back to it.
Some rumors of a multi-year, never discussed. I know that was one of the things out there, but definitely shook out a little different than I expected. Like I said, I've learned a lot in this process. None of this changes who I am, what I want to do, how I care about my teammates, how I prepare. None of that changes anything. And I knew this going in, right? It could be a possibility. But as a player, you fight to get to this opportunity where you do have the right to fight for your rights. And that's what I did. It wasn't just for me. I think it was important for me to fight for my rights, for my family, and for players behind me. So, yeah, I took that bullet, but I'd do it again.
So that was Brendan Donovan, kind of a little bit of an opening statement, knowing that this was going to be a topic that he was asked about at length. And saying some interesting things. Wanted to clear the air. Wanted to say, hey, look, it may have been rumored, reported, whatever was out there about multi-year extension. Not the case. There was no such offer from the Cardinals on a multi-year extension, which is not surprising because we kind of know they're leaving as fresh of a slate for Chaim Bloom as possible. That's at least the way that I view it. I don't think it's anything more nefarious than that, in my opinion. I think it's a case of if you're Mozeliak and you're kind of still in the jurisdiction of being in charge of those types of things, even if Brendan Donovan is considered a building block player, even if Lars Nootbaar, whoever it might be, I just don't think they were doing any of those types of deals this offseason or this spring because of where things are from a payroll perspective, too. I feel like it was going to be as blank of a slate as possible. Chaim Bloom can come in, and it's like, we'll let the next guy make some of those calls. And maybe 2025 can inform that. Like with Nootbaar, Does he play well, and is he durable? Does he play 150 games in left field where you can go, yep, we've seen it, now we trust it, we'll give him a multi-year? Same thing, I guess you could say with Donovan, although he's been durable. He had the elbow issue, had the UCL repair, and did it at a point in the 2023 season where the Cardinals were out of the race and was ready to go full go by spring of this past season. And even talked today about his arm strength and just the general throwing ability being in a really, really good spot coming into this season. And that's after he played a season of, he was an outfielder a bunch last year, 91 starts, played over 100 games in left field, and his arm is probably in a much better spot even today than it was this past year because he's another full year removed from that elbow procedure. So just kind of some interesting thoughts there. But yeah, no multi-year, right? And I think that was not necessarily a surprise to anybody. But it was interesting, too, that when he was asked about it a little bit later, he said the 1 year conversations were not really particularly fruitful. I'll play the question so you guys get a gist of what he is actually answering. I think it might have been Derek Gould that asked the question, but based on hearing the voice as I play it back, I'll be able to tell you for sure. But listen to this question and then the answer that Donovan gives as it pertains to a 1 year potentially extension.
Pretty candid with us about wanting to stay here and open and being open to that conversation with the team. The fact that no multi-year was discussed, even if you've expressed that to us publicly. I mean, what does that tell you? Does that change your view at all about that?
No, but that's out of my hands, right?
Right.
I was open to discussing that. I was open to discussing a 1 year deal. It just didn't shake out that way. That's why I had no choice but to go to a hearing and fight for my rights.
So that was kind of the answer, and that was Derek Gould asking the question about, you have basically kind of put it out there and said, I'd be open to multi-year. And he said, I would have been open to a 1 year just to get this out of the way and not do ARB and not go to a hearing. It just didn't shake out that way. And then it was a good question a little bit later on, asked by Jeff Jones, who basically was like, when did you know that a hearing was in your future? Like, because he had said a couple of times, not a lot of momentum, not a lot of effort, whatever the different phrases he was using to basically say, even when it comes to just like, can we get this done for 2025? It seems as though, and again, I'll let you listen to the last answer here about this one final question, as though the Cardinals really weren't making a push to do anything other than a hearing with Donovan, which again, he came out front because he knew that some of the stuff he was going to potentially say was not inflammatory, but it was, setting the record straight about some of the things in this process, I think is all he was doing, which is well within his rights. I'm glad he did it. And he was respectful, too, where he said, I'm not going to divulge everything. I'll play that clip for you after this, and that'll be kind of how we get out of here. But I wanted to play this as well because it seems pretty clear that, like, from his standpoint, he would have said, hey, these are things that I'm willing to do. I'm wanting to be here. I would love nothing more than to not have to kind of get in the weeds on the salary stuff and deal with this every year for the next 3 years through ARB. But it was like even a 1 year deal, which is kind of like the standard thing. Maybe the Cardinals felt like, no, we're maybe gonna be too far apart to even pursue that. So I'll play the question and you can hear the answer, and I can explain more of kind of how I view this.
Did you ever get to a point where you thought you would be able to miss the process, that you thought a 1 year was close, or was it pretty clear early on that this was going to be what it was, that it was going to be a hearing?
Yeah, kind of like towards the last day of kind of that deadline, it became very clear that there was just minimal effort being made, which is part of it.
From the team side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So minimal effort being made is kind of that phrase again where, like, it's weird, right? And a lot of Cardinals fans, I put some of the info out there on Twitter and some of the responses were basically ripping the organization. Like, how could they do this with Donovan? He's one of their top players. He's one of their glue guys. And I've been beating the drum for Brendan Donovan on this podcast, BFD, as I refer to him, for a long time now, because I think he's one of the core dudes on this team that if the Cardinals are going to have success, that's a guy you build around. That's a guy that you make him comfortable. You make him want to be the torchbearer for the next generation of St. Louis Cardinals baseball. I think that highly of him as a player. as seeing what he is in that room, in that clubhouse, for his teammates. Just I think the community is a huge aspect of what he is. Like, he's the kind of guy you should be proud to have as a player for your favorite team. If you're a Cardinals fan, like, you're a Brendan Donovan fan. If you're doing it right, that's just the way I feel about it. So, like, I've been pretty clear about thinking that, yeah, this is a guy the Cardinals should prioritize. They're not really prioritizing anybody right now, though, so I kind of get it from that perspective. It's not specific to Donovan, although it's kind of probably hard not to take that personally when you're like, I just know across baseball, guys get into ARB, you're valued by your team, you might just skip that whole process and do a lengthy extension, be able to lock up those types of players. It's like, okay, they're not ready to do that for me, and it just feels like, the substitute teacher is coming in after this because they've all got the whatever relationship they have with John Mozeliak, but then you're gonna have a different teacher next year, and you don't know if that teacher likes you or not. So it's going to be a little bit different, right? Like, everybody's kind of going to have to go through that feeling out process with Chaim Bloom, where he could come in and he could change the whole dynamic of the clubhouse, and like that could be unpopular. Or he could come in and keep a lot of it intact if the resources financially are there. Like, we don't really know yet. We don't really hear from Chaim Bloom. They're kind of keeping him in the shadows for the time being, which is fine. He's doing other things aside from what he's going to be doing next year. It's a different role right now, so that's all well and good. But it's kind of like an uneasy feeling, maybe, again, not to put words in anybody's mouth, but you kind of look at it and go, yeah, guys don't really know what's coming next year. We generally have an idea for what this year's going to look like, but as far as like the long-term future, there's a lot of flexibility because the types of guys that historically you'd see the Cardinals early extend, that's not, at least not happening in this year. Now, part of that's probably financial. Part of that is the changeover from Mozeliak to Chaim Bloom next year. The timing of it just maybe makes sense to keep the slate fresh and blank and the canvas to be blank so that Chaim Bloom can find out what the budget is for 2026 and attack it accordingly. Right now, it still feels like a lot of this is transition. That's a word that Mozeliak has used this week, transition, and a lot of it is still kind of up in the air and unknown. But interesting, let me know, Cardinals fans, like, I don't know that you would come away from what Donovan said here, even though he was super respectful, made sure to say, hey, I'm not a disgruntled employee. I want to set the record straight off the top, but I'm also going to tell the truth about some of the things that, I think should be out there, just so it's known. Like, I don't want people thinking I wasn't trying to, get this done with the Cardinals. There wasn't a multi-year offer that was made to me. There wasn't a suitable one-year offer that seemed like it was closer or an effort was being made. So that was how Donovan felt about it. But then the other one thing that I wanted to mention that I thought was interesting, and this question was from Daniel Guerrero, of basically, hey, you said that there were some things that were said in there that they kind of used against you. Can you share anything about that? And he kind of said, no, I don't want to divulge. You'll hear him say it here. But he did say one thing that I thought was super notable, and we could talk about that too.
What can you share that kind of was used against you?
And I really don't want to divulge a lot of that. I mean, we'll say that some of the things that I've been told were valuable were held against me, but I'm not going to divulge some of it.
So that's interesting, right? We'll say that some of the things that I've been told were valuable were actually held against him in the hearing. And that was, again, kind of his spot to be able to say, hey, I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this, but this is what I'll say about it, which was kind of the way of like, and I was standing there the whole time thinking, is there a respectful way to ask for a little bit more on that? But didn't end up doing it, didn't end up coming up with the words in the moment to be like, hey, level with us here. But it would not be a surprise, right, given that last year was the first year he played a ton of outfield. And other than that, had done some outfield the prior two seasons, but was predominantly infield, had more infield innings than outfield innings. In 2024, it was flipped, right? So when you go into an ARB hearing, what's is corner outfield, is left field going to get generally higher salary? And you compare Donovan to some of the contemporaries at that position, but the Cardinals might say, well, you don't really have a position that matches up with the way that you're portraying this. And ultimately, the Cardinals' argument won, and we don't know what the exact argument was. But if he makes a comment and says some of the things I had been told were valuable were actually held against me, my initial thought is that pertaining to his positional versatility, right? Valuable. He's a Gold Glove winner because he's a utility defender, can play anywhere, and has a Gold Glove to his name because of it. And now you get into a hearing room and they're like, are they talking down about the fact that he doesn't have one position? Or is it a case of like, hey, you want to compare yourself to left fielders, but offensive statistics, power numbers, that's a power position. And, here's where he ranks in power among left fielders. It's like, well, wait a minute. I haven't played left field because that's what y'all needed. And I'm a team guy. So that's got to bite. And that's probably the reason the Cardinals were so intent to take him to hearing, because they felt they had a compelling case when it came to that. Doesn't make it fair, doesn't make it one that I think, anybody needs to feel good about. But the Cardinals felt like they had a case, and clearly they were successful ultimately in that. But that's one where you just go, man, this guy is valuable because of his ability to be anything the team needs him to be. A total gamer. Like all the things that Ollie Marmol has said. And by the way, all that's true. Like it's not that Ollie Marmol has lied to Donovan and they were trying to, get him in arbitration. Like that's not functionally how this goes down. But that's got to be frustrating when, they kind of put the screws to you on something that you thought was a calling card of yours. And look, I don't know that specifically that's what was used against him, but that's the first thing my mind jumps to, right? But we were respectful, and there's not a lot more prodding specific to that. Questions about, hey, could you play outfield this year? And he said, my arm's great. I'm ready to go. But it's interesting, right? Something he was told was valuable was used against him. That was probably the biggest quote, in my opinion, that I've heard since getting down here to Jupiter. Because I'm like, yeah, Donovan is so valuable to this team because of his willingness to do anything to fill in where necessary and to be above average at just about every spot you could put him. Was that used against him? The world may never know fully kind of what was said in those rooms. But as far as Donovan's concerned, I don't think overall anybody should overreact to this because, like I said, when he came out and said, I want to set the record straight, I'm not disgruntled by any of this. I learned a lot about the process. Arbitration it's just that. It's a process. Is it perfect? No. Is it the system we have and we have to operate within it? Yes. And he was not complaining. He had a full willingness to do all that. I say all this to kind of make sure folks understand that I don't think this is necessarily something that's going to have long-term implications. It is worth noting that a lot of times the guys that go to ARB, eventually they end up elsewhere. We'll see as it pertains to Ryan Helsley if that ends up being a test case when it comes to his upcoming free agency. You had Jack Flaherty as another recent example, obviously ended up moving on. So, it's a business, no hard feelings, but we'll see. The Cardinals had 3 in one offseason here. Is that a precedent that we end up kind of looking back on and going, yep, they put the screws to guys, lost a couple of times, they were 1 for 3 this year. Not ultimately super successful, but how do the players end up feeling and do they remember that down the road? I feel like bygones could end up being bygones if the new front office comes in and says, yeah, we do. We now have the resources to offer the extensions. But if it ends up turning into again, I don't know the influence of Chaim Bloom on all of this, but he was in Tampa, obviously. Tampa has a history of going to these ARB hearings with guys, but they also aren't a team that historically signs guys long-term. So is that a trend that, the Cardinals can kind of mirror? Do you want that for the Cardinals? Probably not. There are elements of Tampa that I think you do want to take after, but not necessarily that, where you're like, well, we're going to try to just save the money by exercising every last bit of leverage we can when it comes to these ARB hearings and being willing to go to them because, well, if the players don't love it, that's okay. They're probably not long for the team anyway. I'm not saying that that's what's happening here, but it does feel notable that the last few years you've had one guy maybe. It'd be a Flaherty, it'd be a Helsley, it'd be an Edman. And now it's 3 dudes at once, and 2 of them feel like core players on the position side, and the other one is your breakout pitcher from 2024. So we'll see, but like I said, I think as far as the way that Nootbaar and Donovan talked about it, they handled themselves very, very professionally, and it's just what it is. It's a process. So I've talked longer than I want to. Y'all probably won't even have time to listen to all of this because there'll be brand new breaking news tomorrow, I'm sure. It's kind of hot and heavy down here now that the season is underway, the season of spring anyway. But that's going to do it for this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Thank you, guys. If you made it all the way through, you tell me what the code word's going to be that you put in the comments that everybody can say so that I'll know who actually got all the way through this very lengthy episode. This is like throwback to some of the episodes that we used to have. But I had 2 big topics to get into. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Thank you guys so much for your support and for following along throughout spring training. B-Schaeff Daily's over now. Goodbye. Peace.